Okay, so we're deep diving into Yuval Noah Harari's 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. We're talking AI, nationalism, the meaning of life. It's a lot.
Yeah, it covers a lot of ground. And the way Harari brings it all together, using history and science, it really helps you see those big picture connections.
Right, exactly. So for this deep dive, we're working straight from your copy of 21 Lessons. We know our listeners are all about learning, so we'll focus on those insights that'll really get your brain going, whether you're like prepping for a big presentation or just, you know, satisfying that curiosity of yours.
Yeah, we can't cover everything, of course. This book is packed, but we'll hit the most thought-provoking points and hopefully spark some of those aha moments along the way.
Love those aha moments.
Hmm.
All right, so Harari starts off with this idea that the end of history has been, well,
It
postponed.
was
It's
bone.
like he's saying those big 20th century narratives, fascism, communism, liberalism, they're not holding up as well as they used to.
Right. It's not that they've completely vanished, but they're struggling to give us a clear path forward. You know what I mean? Like, especially liberalism. It
Yeah.
seems to be having a bit of an identity crisis these days.
Yeah, it's interesting. Think about Brexit, the rise of like figures like Trump. Harari sees this as a backlash against globalization.
Makes sense.
People might still believe in democracy and free markets, but they want them contained within their own borders.
Yeah, it's like a retreat to the familiar, right? The nation state. It feels safe, while the global order feels more and more uncertain.
It's like stepping back from the unknown.
And then you've got the Chinese model, which is, well, a whole other layer of
No,
complexity.
because it challenges liberalism in a totally different way.
Mm-hmm.
They're wary of globalization, A&D, that like individual freedom that's so central to Western liberalism.
Exactly. So the question is, if these grand narratives are losing their power, what's filling the void?
What's taking their place?
Harari sees a resurgence of nostalgia, this longing for a simpler past.
Like, make America great again. Or
Mm,
think about those Brexiteers, dreaming of a bygone British Empire. It's a longing for an idealized past
yeah.
that probably never even existed.
Right, but that doesn't make it any less powerful. Nostalgia taps into our anxieties about the future. It offers a sense of comfort, certainty, even if it's all an illusion.
I guess that makes sense. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about technology, specifically the impact of technology on the future of work.
Right.
Harari doesn't mince words when he talks about the job apocalypse, the idea that automation is coming for our jobs.
Right. And it's not just about robots replacing factory workers. He sees this combination of AI and biotech as the real game changer.
So like imagine AI analyzing your brain scans, figuring out what you're best suited for, even better than any career counselor could.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
Yeah. It really raises some big questions. What happens if jobs just disappear faster than we can create new ones, you know? Will we end up with this massive underclass of people who just can't find work in this new landscape?
It's a pretty grim picture he paints. Does he offer any solutions to this potential job crisis?
Well, he explores a few possibilities. Government regulation, for one. It could slow down the pace of automation, giving us more time to adapt.
Okay, that makes sense. What about universal basic income? UBI, everyone's talking about it.
It's definitely part of the conversation. But, Harari is a little cautious about UBI. He warns that it could actually worsen inequality.
How so?
Well, imagine this.
Yeah.
Most people are just scraping by on UBI while this small elite group controls the algorithms and reaps all the benefits.
So like this tiny group living in luxury and basically treating the rest of us like data points, I guess.
To be mined for profit, yeah. It's a risk we need to consider. Another option Harai talks about is focusing on those uniquely human skills, the things that AI just can't replicate. Think about creativity, empathy, critical thinking.
Playing to our strengths makes sense. But is it enough to avoid mass unemployment in a world where AI is becoming more sophisticated all the time? I mean,
Yeah.
that's a question we might need to, dive into another time. But for now, I have to admit that Harari's take on the future of work is definitely making me think.
Yeah, it's not just about specific jobs, is it? It's about what it means to be human in this age of accelerating technological change. What are our values? What gives our lives meaning if work is no longer that central focus?
And that leads perfectly into another big idea Harari tackles,
Hmm.
this challenge to individual freedom, which, it's one of the cornerstones of liberal thought. Liberalism encourages us to, like, follow our hearts, pursue our desires. But what happens if those desires aren't really our own?
That's the question, isn't it? If biotech and AI can predict and even manipulate our desires, What does that mean for free will? Does it even exist in a world where algorithms know us better than we know ourselves?
It's kind of like that scene in Minority Report where they can predict crimes before they happen, but
Hmm.
in this case, it's our choices, our desires that are being predicted, maybe even controlled.
And the implications for democracy. I mean, if our choices are being manipulated by these unseen forces, how can we make informed decisions about, who governs us or what policies we support?
It's a pretty chilling thought. We could end up in what Harari calls digital dictatorships,
Mm.
which, are way more subtle and insidious than anything Orwell could have imagined. And maybe even more effective, right? Because they're not forcing us to do anything. They're giving us what we think we want. Convenience, personalization, endless entertainment.
It's a slippery slope for sure. We need to be aware of how these technologies are shaping us, our thoughts, our behaviors, and we need to be proactive about protecting our privacy, our autonomy.
Absolutely. Okay, let's switch gears again. Let's talk about religion in the 21st century. Harari's view on this is, well, complicated. He argues that traditional religions, they become kind of irrelevant when it comes to, like, solving technical problems.
That's true. We don't turn to priests to solve climate change or cure diseases anymore.
Right. Science has taken over those roles.
Right.
But where religion remains relevant, well, and potentially dangerous, is in the realm of identity. It can unite people, but often by, like, drawing those sharp distinctions between us and them, which, that can lead to conflict, discrimination.
Think about the role of Shinto in Japan's modernization. They used their traditions to build a really strong sense of national identity, and that ultimately contributed to their success.
But then you've got countless examples of religion being used to justify discrimination and violence in different parts of the world.
Yeah,
It's a double-edged sword for sure.
absolutely. It can be a force for good or for ill. It all depends on how it's used and,
Oh.
the stories it tells. Speaking of stories, that brings us to a really fascinating idea that Harari explores, the knowledge illusion.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What is that?
Well, it's this tendency we have to think we know more than we do.
I think we're all guilty of that.
Oh, yeah. We rely on experts, right? We trust information we see online, but we often don't really understand the complexities beneath the surface.
Yeah, like I might have strong opinions about certain, I don't know, political issues.
Yeah,
But if you asked me to explain the actual policies involved, I'd probably struggle.
exactly. And in a world that's becoming so complex, so specialized, this knowledge illusion can have real consequences.
Like people having strong opinions about, say, climate change, but without really understanding the science.
Perfect example. Harari really stresses this idea of intellectual humility, being willing to acknowledge what we don't know, being open to challenging our own beliefs.
Yeah, it's so easy to get stuck in those echo chambers, right?
Yeah.
Surrounded by people who already agree with us. But to actually step outside those comfortable bubbles,
It can be tough.
it can be really tough.
But it's crucial, for developing those critical thinking skills, for making informed decisions.
So how do we break free from this knowledge illusion? Does Harari, offer any guidance?
Well, he encourages us to be more mindful. Where does our information come from? And try to actively seek out diverse perspectives. Don't just passively absorb, whatever you see on social media or hear from your usual sources. Dig deeper, question those assumptions. Be open to changing your mind.
That's great advice. But in this world of, fake news, algorithms designed to feed us information we already agree with, can we even be sure what's true anymore?
That's the million-dollar question. Harari makes this provocative point. He says what we call fake news is really just a story that hasn't been around long enough to gain the legitimacy of a religion.
Oh, wow. So he's saying that there isn't really a clear line between fiction and reality. That's a
Yeah.
little unsettling.
It is, but it doesn't mean all stories are bad. I mean, stories are incredibly powerful, right? They
Yeah.
can inspire us, unite us, help us make sense of the world.
I mean, think about all the great works of literature, right? The
Yep.
ones that have shaped our cultures, our values.
Mm-hmm.
We wouldn't want to live in a world without stories.
Absolutely. The key is to be aware. What stories are we consuming? And be able to distinguish between fiction and reality, especially when we're making those big decisions.
Okay, so with all these old stories, these grand narratives like liberalism, even religion, they seem to be losing their grip a little.
Yeah.
What stories does Harari think can guide us in the 21st century? Where do we find meaning in a world that feels, I don't know, increasingly chaotic, uncertain?
Well, he explores a few possibilities. He talks about, the circle of life narrative. You see that a lot in nature, even in popular culture. He looks at the idea of linear progress. But ultimately, he emphasizes this idea of personal exploration. The stories that really matter, they're the ones that extend beyond our individual lifespans.
So like thinking about our legacy, our impact on the world, the things we leave behind.
Yeah, that's part of it. The stories we tell ourselves, they should give our lives meaning, not just for today, but for generations to
It's a
come.
lot of responsibility, but also kind of empowering, you know? We get to choose those stories. We get to choose what future we create.
That's the beauty of it. We're not just passive consumers of stories, we are active creators. And to create those truly meaningful stories, Harari believes we need to cultivate things like mindfulness and self-awareness. He's a big advocate for meditation.
Meditation,
Uh-huh.
really. That seems a little unexpected coming from a historian philosopher.
Yeah, it might seem surprising, but he doesn't see it as an escape from reality. He sees it as a way to connect with reality more deeply by calming the mind, observing our thoughts, our emotions without judgment. We can gain a clearer understanding of ourselves and, the world around us.
So it's not about like sitting on a mountaintop and chanting Om. It's about being present, aware in our everyday lives.
Exactly. And he argues that this kind of mindfulness is, well, it's essential for navigating the complexities of the 21st century. I mean, think about it. We're bombarded with information, distractions, conflicting narratives. Meditation can help cut through all that noise, help us find some clarity, some purpose.
If we don't even understand our own minds,
Yeah.
how can we hope to understand the world around us?
And make wise choices about the future.
Right. Speaking of wise choices, one thing that really struck me was Harari's discussion of AI and ethics. He suggests that AI could actually make better ethical decisions than humans in some cases.
Yeah, he uses that example of self-driving cars. Imagine a car programmed with a combination of ethical frameworks, say Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative, combined with the practical split-second decision-making of, I don't know, like a race car driver, like Michael Schumacher.
Wait, Michael Schumacher, the Formula One guy,
Yeah.
what does he have to do with ethics?
Well, it's about combining that rule-based ethical system with the real-world experience of, someone who has to make those life or death decisions in a fraction of a second.
So the AI would have to make these like tough calls in real time, like whether to swerve, to avoid a pedestrian, even if it means putting the passenger at risk.
Exactly. Those are the kinds of complex ethical dilemmas that we as humans grapple with all the time, right? And Harari suggests that AI, programmed with the right mix of those ethical principles and practical experience, might actually be better equipped to handle them.
But wouldn't that mean surrendering control? Like letting machines decide what's right and wrong?
It's a valid concern for sure. But the reality is, we humans don't have a perfect track record with ethical choices, right? We're biased, we're emotional, we often make decisions that benefit ourselves, even if it harms others.
I mean, think about all the wars, the conflicts throughout history, fueled by, greed, hatred, ignorance.
Exactly. And in a world with autonomous weapon systems, those stakes are higher than ever. It's a scary thought. But maybe, just maybe, AI could help us break free from those destructive patterns, help us create a more ethical future.
It's definitely a lot to ponder. It really is a lot to ponder, a lot to think about. It's almost like we're being asked to rethink what it even means to be human in this crazy, rapidly changing world.
Yeah, it's about adapting, evolving, and that ties into another key theme that Harari explores, the challenge to those liberal values, particularly that emphasis on individual freedom.
Right.
Liberalism tells us to follow our hearts, right? Make choices based on our desires or beliefs. But what happens when technology starts to blur the lines between what we truly want and what's being influenced or even manipulated?
Yeah, it's almost like the digital age is creating this dot paradox. We have more choices than ever, but we're also facing these unprecedented threats to our privacy and autonomy.
Exactly. Harari argues that biotech and AI, they have the potential to undermine those very foundations of liberalism. If our desires, our choices can be predicted and manipulated, what does that mean for the concept of free will?
Does it even exist anymore? In a world where algorithms seem to know us better than we know ourselves.
It's a question that philosophers have been debating for centuries, but it takes on a whole new urgency in the context of these powerful technologies. Think about the implications for democracy. If our choices are being influenced by forces we don't understand, how can we say we're truly in control of our own destinies?
It's a scary thought.
Yeah.
We could end up in what Harari calls these digital dictatorships, which are far more subtle and pervasive than anything Orwell could have imagined.
Right.
It's not about jackboots and overt oppression. It's about seduction, almost, being nudged and manipulated in ways we might not even be aware of.
And it's all the more insidious because it often comes disguised as, convenience, personalization, entertainment. We're willingly handing over our data, our preferences, our innermost thoughts and feelings to these platforms, these algorithms, often without really grasping those potential consequences.
So what can we do about it? How do we protect our freedom, our autonomy in this digital age?
Well, Harari doesn't offer any, easy solutions, but he stresses awareness. We need to understand how these technologies work, how they're being used, and those potential risks they pose, not just to our individual liberties, but to democratic societies as a whole.
It's about being more critical consumers of information, questioning those narratives that are presented to us, and demanding greater transparency, accountability from those tech companies that are collecting and controlling our data.
Absolutely. And it's about fostering that sense of collective responsibility. We need to have those open, honest conversations about the ethical implications of these technologies and, work together to create safeguards that protect human dignity, human freedom in this rapidly changing landscape.
Now, let's shift gears for a moment and talk about another big theme you've highlighted in your notes, the role of religion in the 21st century. Harari's perspective on this is, well, it's pretty nuanced.
Yeah. He acknowledges that those traditional religions, they've lost some of their relevance, especially when it comes to solving those, practical problems. We don't look to priests to cure diseases or explain the mysteries of the universe anymore.
Right. Science has kind of filled those roles.
Right.
But he also recognizes that religion remains a powerful force in many people's lives.
Yeah.
When it comes to providing that sense of identity, belonging, meaning.
Absolutely. And he points out that it can be a double-edged sword. It can inspire great acts of compassion and altruism, but it can also be used to justify discrimination, violence, even war.
And it seems like he's particularly concerned about the dangers of nationalism, which, he describes as his kind of secular religion.
Yeah, he sees it as this really powerful force that can unite people, but often by creating this sense of us versus them. It's about drawing those boundaries, defining who belongs, who doesn't, and often demonizing those who are seen as outsiders.
And in a world that's becoming more and more interconnected, interdependent, that kind of thinking can be incredibly dangerous. It can lead to conflict, to isolationism, a refusal to cooperate on those global challenges like climate change or, pandemics.
Precisely. So if nationalism is part of the problem, what's the solution? Well, Harari suggests we need to cultivate a sense of global citizenship.
Global citizenship.
That recognition that we're all part of this interconnected human family, sharing this planet, facing those common challenges.
It sounds beautiful in theory, but how do we actually put that into practice? Especially with all the forces in the world that seem to be pushing us towards, division and tribalism.
It's not easy, but Harari points to examples like, say, the European Union, imperfect but hopeful steps towards building a more integrated and cooperative world. He also emphasizes education, empathy, cross-cultural understanding.
As essential tools.
Essential tools, yeah, for fostering that global citizenship.
It's about learning to see beyond our own narrow national identities, right? And recognizing that common humanity that connects us, despite our differences.
Exactly. And it's about challenging our own biases, questioning those stories we've been told about us and them, being willing to step outside our comfort zones, connect with people from different backgrounds, different cultures.
Speaking of stories, there's another fascinating concept that Harari explores that I wanted to touch on, the knowledge illusion.
Oh, yeah, that's a big word.
It's this idea that we tend to, overestimate how much we actually know.
Yeah.
We rely on experts. We trust the information we find online. But often, we don't have that deep understanding of the complexities beneath the surface.
It's like we're living in this age of information overload, but we're not necessarily any wiser.
Exactly. And that knowledge illusion, it can be dangerous, right?
Sure.
It can lead to poor decisions, holding on to false beliefs, being easily manipulated by, those who are more knowledgeable or who have some agenda to push.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do we combat this knowledge illusion? How do we become more informed, more, discerning citizens in this world? It's like a wash in information, misinformation, disinformation.
Well, Harari emphasizes intellectual humility, recognizing the limits of our own knowledge, being willing to admit when we're wrong, and being open to, learning from others.
It's also about cultivating those critical thinking skills, learning to evaluate information, question those assumptions, distinguish between those reliable sources and the less trustworthy ones.
Right.
And it's about embracing that diversity of thought, seeking out perspectives that challenge our own, engaging in respectful dialogue with people who hold different views,
Yeah.
and being open to changing our minds when presented with, compelling evidence or arguments.
Exactly.
It sounds like he's calling for this kind of intellectual revolution, this shift in how we approach knowledge, how we approach learning in this, increasingly complex and interconnected world.
I think you're right. He's challenging us to move beyond that passive consumption of information, to become more active, more engaged learners,
Yeah.
to be critical thinkers, to be responsible citizens.
Well, on that note, I think we're going to have to wrap up our deep dive into 21 lessons for the 21st century.
Mhm.
It's been quite a journey exploring these big ideas with you.
It has.
We've covered everything from the future of work to the challenges to liberalism, the role of technology, the power of stories, and even the uncomfortable truth of suffering. There's definitely a lot here to unpack, and we've only just scratched the surface, but hopefully this deep dive has given you some food for thought, maybe even inspired you to pick up a copy of 21 Lessons yourself and dive in deeper.
Yeah, because these aren't just abstract ideas. They have real-world implications
Yeah.
for our lives, for our societies, for the future of our planet.
Exactly. So keep those conversations going, keep questioning, keep learning, and most importantly, keep engaging with those ideas that challenge you, that make you think differently about the world and your place in it.
The future isn't predetermined. It's being shaped right now by the choices we make, the stories we tell, the actions we take.
So what story will you choose to be a part of? What future will you help create?